listener production.
Hey, Bension Siebert here with the briefing. Humans have long thought of ourselves as unique, set apart from and above other animals. But new research is uncovering how we might be a lot less special than we might like to think. In recent months, scientists have made some incredible discoveries about the way animals communicate. In May, researchers in Canada established that the rhythmic clicking sounds made by sperm whales are arranged in a kind of phonetic alphabet. And this week, a team of scientists published research showing that wild African elephants in Kenya address each other using calls that are unique to individual elephants. In other words, elephants call other elephants by specific names. So what do these discoveries tell us about our own place in the world? Is there such a thing as language among non-human animals? And are we inching closer to something like translating it? Mickey Pardo is a behavioural ecologist and postdoctoral fellow at Colorado State University, and he's the lead author of this new study of African elephants. Mickey, thanks so much for joining us. Tell us what you've discovered about the way that elephants communicate.
So we found that elephants address one another with individually specific name-like calls. So basically, they produce different calls when addressing different members of their family, and they can tell by hearing a call whether it was intended for them or whether it was intended for someone else.
Does this tell us something about our own place in the world? Does it mean that humans aren't quite as unique as we thought we were?
Yeah, this isn't actually the first time that we've discovered name-like calls in other animals. There are a few other examples of it. And I think this is definitely kind of chipping away at that illusion of human supremacy that, like this idea that we're somehow separate from all other animals and that only we are, cognitively advanced. I think there's more and more growing evidence that other animals are a lot more sophisticated than we've previously thought.
What are those other animals that make name-like calls?
So one of them is bottlenose dolphins. So bottlenose dolphins have signature whistles. Every individual has their own whistle that they develop when they're young, which is kind of like their call sign. And they usually use that to introduce themselves to other dolphins. But occasionally a dolphin will copy somebody else's signature whistle to address them, kind of like calling them by name. And another group of animals that has calls kind of like this is parrots. So a few different parrot species have been found to use different calls when addressing different members of their social group. And at least in one species of parrot, and possibly all of them, this seems to involve imitation of the receiver's calls as well.
How does it actually sound when an elephant is calling out another elephant's name? And can you give us your best impression of it right now, please?
I can try. So it's a little hard to imitate because, you need really massive vocal cords to be able to produce sounds that are as low as what elephants do. But it sounds kind of like, but a lot deeper than that. It's a rumble. We call them rumbles, and that's what it sounds like. It's a very low-pitched, rumbling sound. And it's actually kind of hard to discern differences between the calls to the human ear. We've shown experimentally that the elephants can tell the difference, but it's hard to hear it as a person, especially because even if I were to reproduce the call perfectly, it wouldn't come through the speakers. Most commercial speakers often, don't really faithfully reproduce audio below about 300 hertz. Well, most of an elephant rumble is below 300 hertz. So
is that below what we can actually hear as well? Or is...
So the limit of human hearing is generally around 20 hertz. But the limit of what most commercial speakers can reproduce is a lot higher than that. And even if you had a specially designed subwoofer that could fully reproduce the call, we still wouldn't hear the lowest frequencies because they're just below our range of hearing. But our ears just aren't as sensitive even to the frequencies that we can hear. And so we're missing a lot of the call. And I found that if you play the calls back at, say, like 5 times their original speed, sometimes it's easier to discern differences between them just because it's actually being transferred into a frequency range that our ears are better adapted to discerning.
So I read that you were basically following elephants around in a jeep. Is that how you went about it? How did this study work?
Yeah, Toyota Land Cruiser, but essentially. So these elephants have been studied for decades, and so they're habituated to humans as long as you stay in a vehicle. If you go out of the vehicle, they kind of see you as a threat, understandably so, because they often get shot at by people on foot. But as long as you're in the vehicle, it's fine, and you can drive right up to them, and they just treat you as part of the environment. So we would follow them around all day, and we know who all the individuals are because of this long-term study, and can identify them by the unique shapes of their ears mostly. And so we would record them the entire time that we were with them and just spend as much time as we possibly could with the elephants. And whenever we recorded a call, we tried to figure out who made the call and who they were addressing. And then we took those calls where we were able to figure out who the call was addressed to. And we tried to train a machine learning model to identify the intended recipient of the call just from the call's sound properties.
How significant is the use of names in, I guess, the hierarchy of communication? How big should we consider this discovery in terms of how smart we think elephants are in comparison to ourselves and also in comparison to other animals?
It's a pretty rare ability as far as we know. There's only a few other species where evidence for names or name-like calls has been found. Namely, obviously humans and then bottlenose dolphins and a few parrots. There's some suggestive but not conclusive evidence in Egyptian fruit bats that it's not clear if they're using names, but they do seem to use different calls when addressing when addressing different individuals. And, it could be more common than that. I think we underestimate a lot of animals, more so than we underestimate elephants, actually, because I think a lot of people understand that elephants are pretty intelligent, which is true. But I think sometimes we underestimate other animals even more. And I think that at least for the species that are capable of learning to produce new sounds, which is only a minority of animals, the possibility for names is there. It's hard to compare the intelligence of two different species that evolved in different contexts. And almost always when you try to do that, you'll find that one species is better at one thing and the other species is better at something else. And so I think rather than thinking of this as a scale of intelligence from more to less intelligent, it makes more sense to think about it as in terms of the environment that the animals have evolved in and what they're good at being related to their evolutionary history.
Okay, so in recent months, we've also heard that sperm whales use a kind of phonetic alphabet. Do you think that we're ever going to be in a situation where we can actually translate an animal language? And is there such a thing?
So right now, there is no evidence that for an animal language in the sense that linguists use the term language. So this is something of a controversy because I think different people have different understandings of what language means. And so if you think of language as just a byword for communication, then all animals communicate and they often have quite sophisticated communication. But in the sense that linguists use language, it's not just a form of communication. It's a form of communication where you can represent almost any idea symbolically and talk about essentially any topic through a combination of a large vocabulary of symbolic words and a grammar that puts them all together to allow you to convey complex ideas. And at least as of now, there is no evidence for such a thing in any other species of animal. With that said, I wouldn't completely rule out the possibility that we might someday discover that, simply because there's a lot of animals with really large brains and really sophisticated behavior that we've barely studied in terms of their communication. So a lot of people will say categorically, humans are the only species with language. I think that's a little bit too strong because there's just so many species that we've barely studied at all. And so if there were another species with language, then I do think that someday it would probably be possible to translate it in a way. But that's a big if, because right now there's no evidence for that.
What do you think is the new or the next frontier in this kind of research? What are you looking to find out that we don't know already?
I think in a big picture sense, trying to kind of push the boundaries of how complex we imagine animal communication to be is a really promising way of moving forward, in my opinion, because it's not like nobody had ever considered the possibility of names in elephants before, but nobody really looked at it before this study. And I wonder if somebody had looked at it before, if they might have found it. And I wonder if maybe scientists are being a little bit too cautious or unimaginative even in what we're willing to imagine other animals being capable of. And if maybe we push that envelope a little bit, we might discover some really interesting things. In terms of my work with elephants specifically, I think the next step forward is to try and figure out exactly how these names are embedded within the calls, because our data suggests that the names are only one component within the calls, and we weren't able to isolate the names. And I think that's a really critical next step to get even more conclusive evidence that the elephants are naming each other, and to understand how they use the names and how they get the names in the first place. We have to be able to isolate those names from the other parts of the call.
Okay, Mickey, well, thanks so much for joining us on the briefing. It's absolutely fascinating research, and I can't wait to see what happens next.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Mickey Pardo there. And that's it for the briefing today. If you enjoyed this ep, please share it with your entire herd. And Antoinette Lattouf is here. Tell us what's coming up on the weekend briefing tomorrow.
Hey guys, this week I chat to the dynamic duo Sal and Al. That's Sally and Alexandra, the hosts of the hit podcasts Two Broke Chicks. We talk about loving fashion, still caring about the environment, being savvy but not a tight ass, and also the art of friendship as an adult. It's a fabulous chat. I have no doubt you'll enjoy it as much as I did.
Thanks, And if you love hearing Antoinette on the weekend briefing, did you know you can also watch her on our YouTube channel? To watch every weekend briefing and a selection of our deep dives throughout the week, subscribe by searching Listener Newsroom. That's LISTNR Newsroom. I'm Bension Siebert. See you soon.